So welcome to Newsela for distance learning. I know that this is it's a completely unprecedented time for everyone. And like, especially as educators, it's a pretty unique and challenging time. And so my hope is through this professional learning in the next hour, you're able to take away at least a few tangible resources and things that you can use with your students. It's pretty amazing to see in the chat so many different subject areas and grade levels represented. So just so you know what this is going to look like, it's going to be a pretty high level approach for like how to use Newsela and how to find content in Newsela, and then how to make that work for your students, whether you're working in a specific content area or you're a special educator who works with students across grade levels, whether you have English language learners, whether you have high school kids or elementary. Like, I know there's a lot of people here, and so continue to ask your questions, but know that I'll point you to the different places that you can find content once you are on the site yourself. Just a little bit about me. My name is Rachel Rickles. I am a professional learning manager here at Newsela. And before I joined the Newsela team, I taught middle school ELA and social studies. And so I'm really grateful for the work that you do, and I'm excited to be able to support you today. So as we jump in, I think I have a little bit of information around like students using devices or printed copies. There's kind of like, my understanding is that in Oakland, there is a wide variety of experience of like device versus printing right now. So I'll speak to both and kind of a variety of experiences. Know that in full transparency, what we go through today, you'll probably like want to spend some time on this afterwards. And so I'm going to send this recording. I'm going to send a shorter, a kind of condensed version to circulate after this, so that you have what you need in addition to our Educator Center, which is another really viable tool that we will talk about. I already saw some questions coming in. Holly and Tammy, as you see things that you think would be good to bring up whole group, feel free to mention those. And team, if you have any immediate goals with Newsela, feel free to write them in the chat as well. So where are we going today? We're going to start with this mini Newsela experience, and then we're going to talk mainly about how you can connect this to your content area, whatever it is, and then how you can craft for your virtual classroom. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about like setting virtual routines that hopefully will build in that structure that we know students crave, and also support you and not like reinventing the wheel every single time you go to create a digital lesson. I know it says Q&A at the end. Of course, feel free to jump in at any time with questions in the chat, and we're here to help. So for anyone who is new to Newsela is an instructional content platform, and we really pride ourselves on being relevant and engaging for students. So the way Newsela works is we partner with different content partners, so places like the Washington Post, the LA Times, procon.org, National Geographic, and we basically take their content and we level it down. So it's appropriate for students at 5 different reading levels, anywhere between 2nd and 12th grade. We also publish things like primary sources and explainers that are similar to the types of things you would find in a textbook, but all of that is available at 5 different reading levels. And for things like primary sources and famous speeches, know that we'll always publish the original content as well. We publish up to 10 articles a day, and so all of those texts are also leveled, and we want to make sure we're publishing content that's really engaging and fresh for students. And then there's a lot of ways to make Newsela accessible. I'm happy to talk through all of those. And then ultimately, we want to make sure that our content is aligned to standards and skills that we're pushing students towards. So what might a Newsela experience look like? First, you might start with this photo. And again, everything I'm showing you is accessible on Newsela and can be, packaged together as one assignment, multiple different pieces, or you can assign things individually. So this picture, I might start Also, I like to start with pictures because they're kind of like the universal language. And so I think it's really helpful in engaging students to start with something like a photo. So I might first have them looking at this photo and thinking about like, what do you notice and what do you wonder? activating background knowledge, thinking about like, what does the fact that it's in black and white tell us, right? Talking about some more specific photo analysis strategies. And then from there, having them make those connections, right? After that, I might push them to this map of the avian flu. This map analysis is also available on Newsela. Kids are obviously going to notice that it's a graphic. What is it telling us? Then probably working towards a text. So in this case, talking about the impact of the flu, maybe utilizing this annotation tool, which we'll talk about, another great way to scaffold. And then ultimately to this article, which is obviously very timely on the spread of COVID. And so the goal here, right, is to just talk to students. Like, what conclusions can you draw about this topic? What information was confirmed? What conflicts did you see? All of these are really the critical thinking questions that you can have students do. And again, any of the pieces I just showed, the picture, the map, the articles, all of those can be applied to a variety of topics. You can print them, you can assign them online, whatever works the best and whatever truthfully is the situation that you're working with. So now we're going to talk about how to connect to your content. And this is really where we're going to go live on the site, and we're going to spend the rest of our time there. So when you log in, when you create an account on Newsela, and the way that you access Newsela is just through newsela.com. You can type that into your browser. If your school uses Clever, you can add this to your Clever Launchpad and go in that way. But ultimately, this is the site that you're going to be brought to. You'll see current events content at the top. So you'll see that this is going to change every day. You'll also see this box right here, which is going to talk about what's going on in our Educator Center. Our Educator Center is our teacher learning hub. It's accessed right from the top on the right-hand side. And in the Educator Center, you'll see tons of resources to use for you and your students. So if you're a Google school or you're using Google Classroom, feel free to check out this video and this FAQ doc. You'll see here our remote teaching toolkit, some office hours to support you all, student-facing resources. This is kind of where you'll go if you're looking for support in how to use Newsela. And of course, there's a search function here as well. When you click into any article, you'll be able to see that it looks like this. I'm going to look at it first in English, and then I'll talk about how to access it in Spanish. So all Newsela articles will have a similar format to build that consistency. There'll be a headline at the top, some features underneath, which we'll talk about, a picture, a caption with a byline with some important information, and then the text itself. And the first piece, that's the bread and butter of Newsela, is that we publish this nonfiction content at 5 reading levels. The way that you adjust the level is in the top right-hand corner. You'll be able to see a number with an L. That number with an L is called a Lexile level, and it's how we measure reading levels. So something to just call out here is that you don't have to memorize the Lexile to grade conversion. Just know that a higher number is going to be a more complex text. For people who are wondering, like, hey, what does a 10-20 Lexile level mean? Know that under the byline, you'll be able to see this text level. So that's telling you that this is a 7th grade text. No, you'll have access to this as an educator, but students will only be able to see their Lexile level. They will not be able to see text level. I'm always a fan of transparency. I wouldn't like keep it a secret, but just know that your students will only see the Lexile level. A couple of other things to note here is that this byline will tell you where the content originally came from. So in this case, it's from Forbes, when it was published, and then also super important is this recommended for. We know that students might have a variety of reading levels, but a student who's 8 years old is going to be much interested in different things than a student who's 18. And so the function of this recommended for is to tell you, like, hey, we'll publish this article at 5 reading levels, but we think it's going to be most interesting to upper elementary and middle school students. So as you're thinking about either differentiating, if you have students who are English language learners and maybe they're reading at a lower level in English, but they're in high school, use this tool to support them and find content that's recommended for high schoolers. You can then level it down or up as much as you'd like, simply by clicking on this arrow and then adjusting. You probably by now noticed that when I expand on this, it says English, and that's because this article is also offered in Spanish. Once you're in a text, so you've clicked into the article, you'll be able to know that the article is in Spanish by if it says Spanish up here. If it's not offered in Spanish, this just wouldn't be here. If you click Spanish, it will flip the text into Spanish. And that Spanish text is also available at 5 different reading levels. And again, you can see from text level who it is available, what is the corresponding grade level. I'll go through in a couple minutes how to find content in Spanish, but know that from within the article, you can access that content from here. This activities panel is also going to be super important. Every single Newsela article will come with a quiz and a write prompt. If you click on the quiz, you'll be able to see that the quiz is going to be 4 questions, 2 questions each about 2 different reading skills, so for a total of 4. So you might see the first 2 questions about what the text says, and then the next 2 about multimedia or arguments and claims or central idea. Those are some of the reading skills that we test. And from there, your students can take the quiz. The beauty of having access to Newsela's full suite of products is not only that you can see student data, but actually now this data is going to adapt to meet the needs of your students and to find their just right reading level. Another incredible part of Newsela is that you're able to, the platform will adapt over time. So it will start off assigning your students articles at whatever grade level they're in or closest to. So for example, if you're a 7th grade teacher, it will start off giving your students articles at a 7th grade level or just below. Over time, as students take these quizzes, if they're doing really well, it will start to bump them up to an 8th grade level. If they're struggling, it will bump them down. And then as they're doing well at those lower levels, it will bump them back up. You can simply assign that differentiated content by clicking assign and then keeping it at that Newsela recommended level, which I promise we'll go through in a little bit. Because the quizzes are how we determine students' reading levels, they cannot be modified by the teacher. A couple of other things to note, the quizzes are also available in Spanish, as are the write prompts. And these quizzes will look a little bit different at each reading level. So for example, if we drop this to a different level, oh, that was the one we were on, sorry. You'll notice that it's still the same reading skill being assessed, but the question is more appropriate to a 9th and 10th grade level compared to that lower one. And that is the same in Spanish as well. If you click this arrow back out, you'll see this write prompt. This write prompt can be edited. It will always have something here, so if you're just looking to support students and give them at-bats, you can certainly just leave whatever's here. But if you do want to edit it, you can click edit, write in whatever you want to ask, and then click save. And all of your students, regardless of what reading level they're at, will see this write prompt and be able to complete and submit it to you. I'm going to just take a quick peek at the chat. Let me know, Holly and Tammy, if any questions came up.
I think the biggest question, we had a couple about searching for Spanish content. So I know that was one you mentioned showing. So yeah, that's really the biggest thing right now, I think. Okay,
sounds good. Thanks. So let's talk a little bit about search, and then we'll dive into the subject-specific products. So a couple of things here. Search is in the top left-hand corner, and it functions better for content than for skill. What I mean by that is if you know you're teaching about climate change, but you're hoping to support students in making inferences, search climate change, and then we'll help you navigate to find that content to support students in making inferences, and you'll also be able to find some content in the subject-specific products. To find Spanish content, you just type in whatever you want to teach about. So I would search climate change. And a couple of things you can do here. If you just want to see what's here, but just know like, hey, like I wonder what's in Spanish. If you use these little icons, you'll notice that right now I'm kind of hovering over this ES logo on the article. And that means that this article is going to be offered in Spanish. So if you're just kind of like ballparking and seeing, okay, like what's in Spanish, I know that these two are, you can make that determination. If you want to make sure you're finding content in Spanish, what you can do is click on more filters. And so again, you do have to search first and then you'll find more filters. You'll click on Spanish and then apply, and you'll know that all of this content is in Spanish. If you click into the article, you'll see it in Spanish, and you can always click it over to English. Know that all of our content that's offered in Spanish is also offered in English. So you can click it over and then see if you want to read it that way, or obviously if you are a Spanish speaker, then you can keep it in Spanish and go from there. Just so you know, in the agenda, which I will repost now, I do let you guys know how there's a step-by-step directions on how to do that in here. So if you're like, hey, I'm going to forget how to do that, no worries. Please know that it's in the agenda. You can just click that link and find it. Okay. So let's just talk briefly about these different subject products, and then we'll spend some time diving in. So you have the Newsela homepage. The news tab at the top is going to always be helpful to you if you're just looking for current events. Library is going to have kind of general evergreen content, but especially if you teach ELA, science, or social studies, or even if you don't, but you're looking for interdisciplinary content, you'll want to click into one of these subject products. They're all set up in a similar way. So once you learn to navigate one of them, you'll get the hang of navigating all of them. And so what it looks like is this. When you click into ELA, you'll see this, these current events articles at the top specific to that content area. Obviously, literacy is rooted in all content, and so this is going to vary, but in social studies and science, it will be specific to that. And then you'll see these rows of seasonal and meaningful content. This time, the season is distance learning, and so all of these rows are going to help you find content that is most curated and is certainly appropriate and vetted for digital learning. The other place I want to draw your attention to is this left-hand navigation. In ELA, Newsela Science, and Newsela Social Studies, right under Explore Collections, you'll see ELA Distance Learning and Daily Lessons. In Social Studies and Science, in Social Studies, this is kind of a sneak peek, you'll see Social Studies Distance Learning, and in Science, you'll see Science Distance Learning. These collections, like Virtual Field Trips was just added today, these collections are going to be the most helpful and appropriate for distance learning, although you can really make anything on Newsela appropriate for distance learning. So what do I mean by that? Basically the purpose of these collections is to provide teachers with resources to support students during this time on paper or digitally. And so all of these resources will come with teacher supports and even parent and caregiver supports to support you all during this time. And so the way this entire kind of toolbar works is if you click on these arrows, you'll see different topics kind of pop up, and from there you can click in. The majority of our ELA collections are curated for elementary, middle, and high school level, keeping in mind that these texts, all nonfiction texts, will still be at 5 levels, but these are going to be developmentally appropriate, although to be honest, I think there's also a lot of overlap that I've seen. So just to show you what like the Let's Write, this distance learning collection offers, if you're looking for writing resources for your students, you can click into this and say, you know, what type of writing do I want my students doing? Maybe I want them writing a letter for change, writing a poem, writing a haiku, right? One of my favorite activities, kind of a fun exit ticket. And again, if you click into any one of these, you'll see the relevant articles and then instructions that you can use to create an assignment. I know that may seem like kind of a lot right now, but know that we'll walk through an assignment. The key here is just to know that to kind of play around And by now, hopefully it's apparent that even if you don't teach ELA, right, you might use these resources as well. Another one of my favorites here is the 30-day write prompt challenge. And so teachers can assign either individually or for a whole week these different write prompts with these articles that are meant to kind of inspire or prompt students to start writing on that specific question. And many of these are also connected to that kind of social and emotional support, having students reflect on who they want to be in the future, how they're feeling right now, how they make friends, things of that nature as well. So all of that is available to you during this time. But there's a couple other places in the ELA product I want to just draw your attention to, and then we'll spend a couple minutes searching. So in the ELA product, just so you know, in addition to distance learning, and this is the same in social studies and science, so if you teach those, feel free to look around. Many of these collections have additional resources to support instruction. So what I mean by that is if you were to look at topics for debate at the middle school level, you'll see here on the left-hand side, there's 5 different options. So you might look at this one, is there a right time and place to protest? And you'll notice that this right-hand bar just kind of popped out called resources. If it doesn't pop out, know that it will always be here and you can click on it. And kind of the key with these resources is that they provide supports for you as the educator. You'll see before, during, and after reading activity. You'll see anything that has blue text is going to expand to an additional resource. So whether you're assigning that digitally or you're printing and making packets, you can use this something like this rubric if that's relevant to you. And I think kind of the nice part about this is like these before, during, and after reading activities, you don't have to use all of them, right? It's not like a lesson plan where if you skip a section, it's going to feel totally disjointed. If you just want to use these annotation directions, feel free to do that. Like if you just want to use the before activity, feel free to do that. If you want to do your own thing altogether, you can do that. The point is that it's here to support you, but you can use any or all of these articles together and make it your own to meet the needs of your students. So a couple of things here, and then we'll dive in. So first is that if you're finding something today and you're like, oh, this looks really great, I would love to, do this later with my students. From any article card, which is what we call kind of this little panel, you're able to save the article by just clicking on this. All that does is it's favoriting it for you on your account. And if you hover over your content, you can find it. You can save an entire text set by clicking save under the title, and it will also save under your content. So know that that is available to you. It's not going to push it out to students or anything, but it's just kind of like a nice way to keep what you've already found. So if you've already created an account, then you can go ahead and spend some time playing around with the search filters or looking at your specific subject product or anyone that's of interest to you, and start to save. If you're new to Newsela, it looks like you're going to be logging in through Clever. And so you can go to your Clever Launchpad and click on the Newsela icon. If you do not know what I'm talking about with the Clever Launchpad, then I'm going to pull up a couple of slides to support you.
Oh my God.
And if you have any questions, continue to write them in the chat. If you are searching because you're good to go, know that we'll bring it back together at 31. If you need to make an account with me, then let's do that together right now. So you can start by going to your Clever Launchpad. So through Clever, you can either log in through your Clever Launchpad or through Newsela.com. Sorry, this isn't what I wanted. It's really up to you. It doesn't make a big difference as long as you're choosing when you're logging in with Newsela to log in with Clever. So as long as you're going through Clever, either on Newsela.com or your Launchpad, you'll be fine. If Newsela isn't in your Clever Launchpad, that makes sense if it's brand new. What you can do is there's a way on the Clever Launchpad to click Add. And if you search for Newsela, you should find it. Yep, you can go ahead and install it if the app isn't there. If you don't have Clever, you can go to Newsela.com and click Sign In. And still, if you click Clever, even if you don't normally use Clever, you'll probably just want to roster through Clever. And in that case, you'll want to just log in with Clever, but you don't have to go through the Launchpad. Once you do add it, you should be seeing this app. And if you just click on Newsela, you won't need to put in your username and password. So basically going through the Launchpad takes out the step of entering your username and password. And that's the same for your students. If you direct your students to go through Clever, they won't have to put in their username and password because it's already in Clever. If you're going through any other application or you want them to just go through Newsela.com, as long as they're clicking login with Clever, they'll be fine. We'll continue to take questions on logging in. In the meantime, spend about 1 more minute going through and searching and saving. If you just got in, try to save an article or 2 in the meantime. And then we'll bring it back together. If for some reason you don't have any class rosters in Clever, there's a way that you can make classes on Newsela, so don't worry, I'll go through that too. For the folks who are arts teachers, you can feel free to use search, or in the library tab, there's an art and culture section, as well as a news at the top. Okay, so it's we're at 32, so I'm going to keep it moving. Again, if you have questions or you want me to go over something again, please feel free to let me know. That's why we're here. And so what we're going to talk about next is setting the tone. We're not going to spend tons of time on this, but I do think it's worth mentioning, especially as we're in remote learning for what seems like kind of the long haul, how you can use Newsela, and just like even outside of Newsela, be thoughtful about like the routines and structure you're building into your remote learning plan. And so what I mean by that is right at the beginning of a school year, we would spend a lot of time thinking about like routines and procedures and right, both academic and social. And so I think it's worth, if you haven't already, spending a little bit of time doing that here and now for the rest of the school year. Right, you have access to this resource in addition to, I'm sure, many others. And so how can you really foster remote routines to not only build in that consistency for your students, but also, like I mentioned earlier, to just make your life a little bit easier, right? There's a lot going on. And so I'm just encourage you to think about within Newsela or even externally, what routines can you build in for yourself and your students? Whether that's like a cadence of assigning articles, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or once a week, or if you're doing packets, right? I'm sure it's a little bit more of a schedule. But in addition, like what academic routines can you build in to really support students and also take some of the guesswork out for yourself? Newsela has an annotation tool. So maybe you're always asking students to underline or to highlight the main ideas in green, right? That can happen every single time. And then that's part of your instructions in any assignment. Maybe you're asking students, you're every week going to publish a text set or assign a text set with 6 articles from topics for debate and ask students to read 3. Again, I know education is not that cookie cutter, right? Like we all know that, but I do think there is some kind of balance and there's value in thinking like, what do you want the next like 6 weeks or 2 months to look like? And then ultimately, maybe establishing those routines will allow you to communicate more effectively and set up that support for your students as well. So that's just kind of something to think about how you can do that with Newsela. We have an entire social emotional learning collection that's really incredible. And so you can access that. It is specific to when it loads, you'll have access to the ones that are relevant to the students that you teach. And so meaning elementary, middle, or high school. So just know that you can always, if you're looking to either have explicit conversations with students about routines, or you're just curious, you want to continue to support students from that social and emotional lens very explicitly, although I know that you're all probably doing that in some way. If you click on your content, you should see elementary, middle, and or high school, depending on what grades you serve. And if you click into those, you're able to see not only a CASEL competency aligned collection set up similar to the ELA and social studies and science ones, but also you're able to see the social and emotional learning collection, which is truthfully feels very relevant, not only for students, but also for all of us who are doing this, right? And so basically, you can use these resources as well, or assign any of these articles to support students. So that's just kind of like an opportunity to think about like how can you set the tone for your students in a way that's meaningful for you and for them. And so now we're going to talk about how to craft for your virtual classroom. And when I say your virtual classroom, I'm going to go through what it looks like to assign virtually, and then I'll also talk a little bit about what printing will look like, and then I'll give you a little bit of time to actually spend some time crafting an assignment, and then we'll finish off rostering through Clever. So how do you craft for your virtual classroom? You can assign one article on Newsela, or you can assign multiple articles in what we call a text set. We're going to go back into Newsela ELA for this. And what you can do is below these collections on the left-hand side, and this is true for ELA Science and Social Studies, basically we have what's called collections, and these will have teacher supports. These will have teacher supports, meaning those resources. These will have kind of sets of articles already together that are going to be, carefully curated. But we also know that sometimes there's something more general. If your school uses any one of these a specific curriculum, so in ELA we have these complements, and in social studies and science as well for different curricula there. And so if your school uses any one of these, feel free to click in and see those complements. And then at the bottom of every subject product, you'll see explore articles, right? Sometimes you just want to kind of find, you want to see like what we have in fiction. Quick note about fiction is that it's only at one level, but you'll always be able to see in that recommended for who we think it's most appropriate for. And then here, kind of my other personal favorite is articles by, I do like articles by text type, but my favorite is articles by theme. Right, we know themes arise across content areas, and so sometimes you might be teaching a text, or you're working on, your students are even like thinking about a specific theme. Maybe something like this surfaces even like in an art class or a social studies class, right? Clicking on justice and injustice, and you'll see all of the articles, fiction, nonfiction, news, library, that are somehow connected to justice and injustice. obviously from here, you can assign just one article or the whole set, although obviously for something like this, there's going to be a lot of articles. Another note for my folks who aren't ELA, science, or social studies teachers, or even just you're looking for a little bit more of a narrow search, articles by subject will show you things like art and culture, careers and education, and then a couple of other social studies curations as well. And so if you are an art teacher, you can obviously feel free to look at these as well. If you haven't yet done this one, can you spot the words and phrases Shakespeare invented? It's very entertaining. I highly recommend it. And again, that's in ELA, articles by subject, and art and culture, and also in search. So this is kind of the key ways that you can kind of leverage Newsela. And now let's talk about how to assign. So say you were in, we're just going to talk about assigning one article, but the way that you assign multiple is very similar. So say you're in topics for debate at the middle school level, and I'm looking at, is recycling worth it? Again, the nice part here is I have these resources. You don't have to use them. So I might look and I might say, okay, this looks good. But I really just want to use the during reading activity, which is going to have this annotation directions. So I would probably copy this so I can ultimately assign it. And these directions are going to work for one article or for multiple. Since we're just focusing on one, I'm going to look at this pro-con. Should we throw away the recycling program? A couple of pieces here to just draw your attention to. The first is that there is an annotation tool on Newsela that you can use to build in scaffolds and support students. The way that the tool works is that you hover over the text that you're going to copy as if you were going to copy and paste it. And when you let go, this box just pops up. You can choose a color and say, ask your students a question. And if you click share, all of your students at this level will be able to see that annotation. You can annotate something as small as a syllable. You can annotate one word. And every time you do that, this box will pop up. When I'm talking about building in routines, especially if your students have access to technology, maybe you want to choose a color coding to work with. But even if your students are annotating, I still think a key, if you haven't already created one, could be really valuable during this time. Know that your annotations will only save at that one level. So if you were to switch the level, oops, I keep doing that. The annotations aren't at all the levels. That, again, is a great opportunity for scaffolding. If you're assigning an article and you're assigning it to students and you know that students at a 4th grade level are going to need some scaffolds and your students at a 6th grade level might not, then only annotate at the 4th grade level. Students can also annotate on their own. So if you're just like, okay, I want my kids to highlight the main idea of each section, you don't have to like prompt them to do that. They can do that on their own without a teacher prompt. Once you've added in the annotations you want, once you've edited the right prompt if you like, you can go ahead and click assign in the top right-hand corner, this blue button. When you're assigning, whether it's one article or multiple, you'll see a page that looks like this. You'll be able to modify the assignment title, so you might want to add in like a due date. And then you'll want to choose the classes for which you want to roster and assign this to. If you've rostered through Clever, you'll be able to see your classes here as well. Then, here is where you choose if you want to assign the article to students at their Newsela recommended level or at one specific level. If you choose to leave it at the Newsela recommended level, what that means is that half your students might open to the 7th grade level and half of them might open to the 9th grade level. If you choose to adjust or lock the level, you'll get the option of the 5 levels that the article is offered at, and you'll choose one. If I'm clicking grade 8, that means all of my students in all of these classes will only be able to see the 8th grade version until they take the quiz. If I reset, again, it's open. Now, definitely add in instructions the way you normally would, because Newsela is not prescriptive. With that one exception of a lock level, Newsela is never going to, and even then, Newsela is never going to require students to do anything to leave the page, right? It's not going to say, stop, you haven't taken the quiz, or stop, you haven't done the right prompt. It's up to you to make sure your kids are, right, they know what you're expecting, because you might on one day expect them to do the quiz and on the next day not. So you'll definitely want to add in instructions. Number 1, read the article. Number 2, and this is where I'm copying from my lesson spark, I'm going to say for each text, highlight in green information that supports one side. I always like to make it crystal clear for kids, so I would say, number 3 is the other side, and number 4, like every sentence is a new direction. Again, that was my personal preference. So, right, and then I might even tell kids, take the quiz and complete the right prompt. Definitely recommend adding in instructions, because ultimately this is how your students are going to know what is expected of them. You can go ahead and click assign, and that will assign the article to your students right away. Or you could have gone ahead and clicked save draft. That will still bring you to this page, but oops, there's on here. But it will bring you to the page, but it will allow you to then go back in, and instead of saying edit, it would say assign. All of your assignments can be accessed by hovering over Binder and clicking assignments. One more thing here, or 2 more things around accessibility. Number 1 is that if you're planning to print an assignment, what you can do is click into the article, and under the headline, you'll see this print option. This print option, if you click on it, will give you the option to click print the article only, print the article and quiz, or print the article, quiz, and answers. Whatever you choose will then take you to this option to print it or save it and download it as a PDF. If you're looking for printable resources or multiple articles that are printed together, what you can do is I would highly recommend starting in the subject products with those distance learning collections. So again, click into ELA, science, or social studies, and then click into distance learning. And you'll see, just to give you an example, you'll see options that are a little more printer friendly, right? You can just copy this whole thing and then print it. And there's also a way to print, and then something like in social studies, you'll be able to, if you look in social studies distance learning, you'll be able to see when it loads that many of the content areas that are commonly taught in social studies are readily available to you in distance learning, and then they're also able to be printed pretty easily. So all that being said, let's take a couple minutes to try either annotating or assigning, and then we'll go ahead and roster with Clever. And so what I mean right now is either find an article from your content that you saved, or just find a new article and just play around with annotating, hovering over that text and looking for that box, and then ultimately creating an assignment. We'll bring it back together at 50. I know that won't be enough time, but it's nice to just have a chance to play around and let us know. Again, feel free to write in any questions you have. We'll bring it back together in about 30 seconds. Okay, so hopefully, I know it wasn't a ton of time, but like I said at the beginning, my goal is just to kind of give you a taste of what's available. And then depending on what you know your students need or what routines you're looking to build, you have the tools, and I'll certainly equip you with them before you leave to know if you want to go back and reference anything, or you'll obviously have our emails to follow up if anything comes up. So a couple of questions related to accessibility that I just want to cover. First is that Newsela has a Tier 2 vocabulary intervention tool called Power Words. And you'll know an article has power words if it has this little lightning bolt, which I'm kind of hovering over on the left-hand side. And what power words mean are that in this article, there will be a few words that are Tier 2 vocab words, so words that students can expect to see across content areas. And they'll be bolded and underlined in green. And if students click on them, they're able to see the word, to listen to the word, and get a definition. They can click got it. And then for these articles that have power words, if teachers and students click on activities, they'll see an additional power words activity, which is activity with those words in context. And so know that that's another additional tool for you to utilize. And know that the power words, if an article has power words, they'll exist at every level, but the actual words that are considered Tier 2 will vary. And so in that case, the actual power words will be different at different levels, but they'll all have power words and the activity. A couple of other access related things. If you have students who are interested or who benefit from text to speech, there's a really cool add-on for Chrome if you're not familiar. I think actually someone wrote this in the chat, I might have seen, but know that this, if you're not familiar, Newsela works really well with Read Write for Chrome, which is an extension also in the agenda, and our text-to-speech app for iOS is also really effective. So if you have students who benefit from text-to-speech, Read Write for Chrome or the mobile app are the places to go. The last place I want to take you before we talk about rostering is this distance learning tab. So if you are a teacher who is responsible, especially for multiple content areas, either assigning during digital learning or beyond, know that this distance learning tab is kind of our hub for centralized multi or cross-curricular activities. So if you're an elementary teacher, you can click on, again, distance learning and then elementary daily lessons. And from there, you'll be able to see printable lessons, a student checklist, and then a lesson each day in social studies, ELA, science, and exploration. And so this is a really great tool if you're trying to cover multiple content areas, or even if you're an elementary teacher and you're just trying to kind of have students read science articles and then also practice literacy skills. or your science teacher is trying to do that, right? Know that these are kind of put together in a way that's really curated and meant to support continuity of learning, because for each week, the topics that are covered will provide that continuity. So again, this is not just for elementary school. We have distance learning daily lessons for middle and high school as well. And obviously those topics, right, are going to be much more meaningful for, or much more age appropriate for students, but they're still printable or able to assign online. So all that being said, okay, Read Write is installed. That's wonderful. Let's go ahead and talk about rostering. So if you do have rosters in Clever, you're automatically signed in through them, but you need to take a step one time to actually sync your Clever classes with Newsela. If you don't use Clever for any reason, there's another way to create your classes as well, and I'll show you that. Feel free to follow along with me right now if you're planning to assign online. If you're not planning to assign online, try looking at those daily lessons and see if anything there is helpful to you. So if you're planning to assign online, go ahead and click on your initials in the top right-hand corner. Here in the settings page, go ahead and click on classes. If you've logged in with the same email that you used to sync with Clever, or you went right through the Clever Launchpad, on this page right now, you should not only see create a class, but you should also see the sync with Clever button. You can, and this will be the same if you are assigning through Google and you logged in with the same email associated with your Google Classroom, then you would see sync with Google. If they're all the same, then you'll see both, and I would suggest picking one to go with moving forward. If you click sync with Clever or sync with Google, it will basically open to whatever you're syncing with, whatever your classes from Google Classroom are, whatever your classes from Clever are. Go ahead and click on those classes, and then click Sync Selected Classes. From there, you should see your synced classes from Google or your synced classes from Clever. To add a co-teacher, if you are a co-teacher, if you need to be a co-teacher, you can do that on Google or on Clever, but know that you need to make that adjustment in Google or Clever and then resync with Newsela. It's not going to let you add a co-teacher right here because you need to do it on that end and then resync. And know that if you teach a class that's anywhere between or 5th grade or below, this elementary toggle will automatically be on for you. What that means is it's going to filter out from search any content that's going to be considered mature or only appropriate for high school students. Newsela really wants to make sure we're covering issues that are important, but we recognize that not all issues are appropriate for our younger kiddos. And so in that case, this elementary filter will ensure that your students are only seeing content that's appropriate for them. So once you've taken care of that, you're able to get started. If you're looking to just create a class, you don't use Clever or Google, you can still click on your name, click on classes, and then just create a class from there. The only difference is your students would need a class code. If your students have, your students should use their school username and password to log in. So directions for logging in would look something like, when you're ready for them to look at an assignment, you'll say log into Newsela using your school username and password. And from there, your students will automatically see anything that you've assigned. And if they're not, you haven't assigned anything, they'll have the option to explore articles, which they'll have either way, but they'll see that option first. So that, I know that was a lot. Like I said, I know it's super important to just take some time to play around with it. Tammy, Holly, and I are here to support you. And we want to make sure that you are feeling supported. I know it's a lot. If you have questions for us, like, hey, how do I use this how would you recommend I do this for a screencast? Or I have to print about this topic, like what do you recommend? Like, we're really here to help you, and we want to make sure like there's no question that's too small. Hopefully there's something you're excited to bring to your students. Again, just another plug for our Educator Center. Not only does it have how-tos and like, how do I roster, how do I assign, all that stuff, but it also has this remote teaching toolkit, which is kind of our hub for distance learning and remote learning as well, and remote teaching. So here you'll find kind of like our quick suggestions for how to get started, little lessons for students, and then some additional strategies and ways to connect right now. Also in our Educator Center, this Let's Chat at the bottom right is our support, is our live chat. It's our on-demand support. So as you have questions, things come up, a student has the wrong login, email us and we'll get it fixed for you, for sure. So, Khalif, if you have anything to add, please feel free to. If not, I'm going to repost the agenda in our chat, and feel free to bookmark that agenda if you have questions. And then finally, I'm going to ask if you have a minute to complete a survey. It's at this link, go.newsela.com/Rachel. And that concludes our session. Holly, Tammy, and I will be here for a few minutes if you have questions. But if not, thank you so much for your time and for the work that you're doing. We really appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Excellent presentation. Just want to extend a big thank you to you and Holly and Tammy.
That's our pleasure.
Team. We really appreciate your support during the school closures. We appreciate you taking the time to provide a training for us today.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
And we are at 12 o'clock. So if you need to go do something else, then feel free to check out. We're going to officially end here, but if you do have a couple of questions, we can stick around for a couple of minutes if you need anything else.
Thanks.
So thanks everybody and have a great day.